Hey guys, welcome back. So at this point we want to start from scratch, so let's remove all of this because this was just to demonstrate the basic concept, and once you have that in mind it becomes easier to understand why we're doing what we're doing. Alright, so what I'm going to do is open this folder and I'm going to delete all files from there. Alright, so everything is gone. Our project folder is now empty and I can close all files from here since they don't exist anyway anymore. Alright, so as per usual, we're going to start by creating a folder structure for our system. So in this case, we're going to create a new folder in the main one, and we're going to call this one app. So I try to avoid using capitalization in my folders because it creates confusion sometimes, because Linux systems are case sensitive, so it's always better to just keep things simple. So I'm going to create another folder, and of course this will be the plugins folder. So the app folder will contain the MVC structure, and the plugins folder will contain the plugins. And then we need another folder called assets to create our assets. Now, if you've watched my other MVC videos, you notice that in here we don't have the usual app and public folders. That's because what we're going to do is we're not going to use that structure, simply because if we use that structure, it means, let me go back here and let me just open the structure here so that we can see it from this angle. So normally what we do is we'd create a public folder like this, okay? And the public folder is what contains the actual index file here, and then the rest of the important files are outside the public folder. This creates a level of security for your internet files so that somebody has only your application has access to all the files in the upper folder, but somebody trying to access those cannot, because they are outside the folder that they're accessing when they access your website. However, the problem with this is that it will mean our plugins folder is also going to be our plugins folder is going to be above the rest of this. It's going to be inaccessible to the public. Now, the problem that's created with that is that if you want your plugins to be self-contained, meaning they contain all the CSS and the JavaScript that help to run the plugin, then those are not going to be accessible to the public, because any folder that is above the public folder, in this case, above the public folder, is not accessible to the browser, which means even your CSS files, your images, etc. will not be accessible. So the only way to do it is to have your plugins folder accessible to the public, which means we cannot hide it behind an upper folder like that. I'm guessing this is why even WordPress doesn't use that structure, because of themes and the like that need to be accessible to the public. So let me delete that folder, and there we go. So we have our app, assets, and plugins. All this should be in the public domain. You can put your uploads folder here, but we can have that generate automatically, but you can put it there if you want for your uploads. So let's do new folder, uploads as well. For when users are uploading content, it should go in there. And then of course we'll need our index file. So I'm going to put index.php over here. Let me save that as index.php. Right, of course we'll need our PHP tags in there so that we can begin our procedure. Okay, so now that we have app in there, I'm going to put a new file called app.php. So this one will be capitalized because it's going to be a class. So I'm going to put some PHP tags over here. Let me save this guy as app.php. index.php with a capital A there because it's a class, of course. And we're going to be using namespaces in here because we don't want any collisions of classes at any point. So of course we're going to say namespace, and this one will be in the core namespace like that. Okay, speaking of which, I should probably move this into the core directory. So inside the app, let's right click and create a new folder and call it core, small letters there. And of course we're going to move our file in there. So let me just open this directory, and inside app, because this is where we have our app, so I'm just going to move that into core over there. Okay, so let me close that. So now it's inside core, and that's because we're going to have a few more folders here. New folder, we're going to have one for models like that, and then we're going to have a let me say new folder. We're going to call this one Thunder. This will be our command line tool for creating models, etc., etc. So we're going to have that folder over there like so. Okay, so notice we're not going to have views as normally we do, where we have our application folder, we have core, we have models, we have views, and we have controllers. So we're not going to have that structure of controller view, because even though this is MVC, but the plugins will handle that. So each plugin will come with its own controllers and views, etc., etc. So let's leave it at that. We have our application, and let's create a class here, and this one is the app class. So it doesn't extend anything, so let's just do that like so. Okay, and here we'll have one function called index, and we'll come back to this a little later. So let me remove that, and let's see, we're gonna call this one a public function since we want it accessible from outside the class itself. So I'm gonna save that. That's great. And now we go back to our index page over here. Now in the core here, we're going to have another file called init.php. So init, this one is not a class, so I use small letters, .php, and then we're going to hit save on that one. So let's save. Let's put our PHP tags. Always make sure you don't leave a space there when doing that, and make sure you don't put a closing PHP tag unless you're going to put HTML below it. So in this case, our init is simply just going to initialize and load files. So for example, we're going to have it require a functions.php file, because of course we will need some basic functions as well. So there, let's create a new file so that we can create that functions file. So functions.php, and also we don't use capitalization here because this is not an app, a class, it's just a functions thing. So we'll be coming back here occasionally to add some new functions, etc., etc. So when we initialize here, we require the functions.php, but our application itself will run entirely in the app.php there. So let's put that here. So we're going to require app.php there as well, but this should always come last, because once we load everything else, that's when we want to run the app, to make sure everything is loaded when we are running the app. Okay, so great. So now we need a way, because the init file is the one that loads the needed files here. We are doing this so that we don't have to require all of this all the time. We can just require this init file. So if I go back to my index.php file here, the first thing we should always do is start our session. So we're going to do session start here, because we always use sessions whenever it's a website where we need sign up and logging in, which we're going to need obviously, as almost every website now is. So we save the current session in the session. So session start there, that's good. And then we need a config file, of course. So let's require that. So we're going to require our config file in here. So config.php, like that. Now the thing is, the reason we're requiring it here and not in the init over here, because I don't want to put the config file inside the core here. We don't want to have to browse all the way to the core to configure our website. It would be better to have the config file in the main folder here. We will just make sure that security doesn't allow us to people to access that, and we're going to fix that. So config.php, and so I'm going to right click on the main folder here, new file, because we need that file, right? So I'm going to put PHP tags because all information should be saved as PHP, even if it's just a config file. So config.php, save there. So we have our config file, that way it won't cause any error when we try to do this. Also, I would recommend that you check the PHP version, because certain things you use here will depend on the PHP version. In this case, we're going to call this mean version. Let's do this. Mean PHP version, like that, is equal to. In my case, I want this to be 8.0, like that. Now, certain online platforms do not yet use PHP 8, so you can put a number that you want here, maybe 7.4, etc., etc. But we're going to be assuming that you have PHP 8 installed. And as we are making the tutorial, I'm going to show you, because we have to be forward thinking, this has to last as long as possible. So what I'm going to do is, when we are adding features that only work in PHP 8, I'm going to inform you here so that you take note of those, and you can remove them if you find that your online hosting service does not support PHP 8 yet and you don't have a way to force them to do that. All right, so here we're going to get the PHP version. I don't even know how to get the PHP version here. So there's a function called PHP version. It's like this. I think there's no underscore. It's just one word. There we go. So the PHP version returns the PHP version. So here we're going to say if PHP version is less than this minimum PHP version, okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to have to echo something here. We're going to say die, actually, and say you need a minimum of PHP version, and then we're going to put that minimum version there to run this app or application or whatever, like that. Now, since this is just one line in here, we can remove the curly braces. We don't need them. This is enough, like so. Okay, so there we go. We require our config file, and then we're going to finally load our init file here. Now the init file is in here. It's inside application. Now keep in mind, we're not going back a folder. We're going into app, and then core, and then init.php, like that. Now the thing is, sometimes the directory slash is different depending on the server you're using. So what we're going to do is make a few definitions here. So we're going to define a few things. So first of all, the directory separator. Going to, it's called directory separator. Now the reason we have to do this is because sometimes on Windows the slashes go this way and not the other way around. So depending on the server you are using, that will depend on that. So instead we have ds as a constant to represent that. So I'm going to change this to that. I'm going to do this. Oops, what have I done? And paste. Okay, so we have the same thing essentially, only that here this is a variable now that we are using, so that depending on the system it's going to match. Okay, also we're going to need a root path as well, so we're going to call this one root path like this, and all I want is the current directory here, so which we can get from using this constant dir underscore underscore. So these are 2 underscores here and 2 more underscores there, and then dir like that, and then we add the directory separator at the end, or we can just use ds in this case because we've already defined it. All right, so that's the root path there. We can also use this root path to make sure that our apps or the classes do not load on their own, but through this index file, because they can check if root path actually exists, and then they know they're being loaded through the index file. Anyway, this is what we have here. And then down at the bottom here, we're going to create an app and say is equal to new app like that. Okay, so we create a new app, and then in that app we have one function in there, so we're just going to run that function like this. Okay, there we go. So this is what runs our application. Now app is inside the core namespace, so we're not going to access it by doing this, so we have to specify that this is inside the core namespace like so, and then application. All right, so keep in mind that core is capitalized there, don't forget that as well. And once we do that, everything should work as intended. Now, like I mentioned, if your PHP version is less, just put that number that you have running on your PHP, but I would encourage you to upgrade to PHP 8 because it comes with some neat features. All right, so far so good. What else do we need? Now, of course, because we're going to be adding plugins like mentioned earlier, we need an actions array that is going to hold the actions that we create for. This is the main backbone of our plugins system. So we also need filters. So these are actions and then filters over there. And then I'm going to create another variable, another array called app, which is going to contain some information about our app. So for example, one piece of info it's going to contain is the URL like that, because this is very important, especially for MVC systems, because we're going to keep in mind we're still using MVC here. So we're going to put an htaccess file that will change how things are loaded over here. So in here we're going to have a function called split URL. I think that's what we're going to call it. You can call it anything you want. And once we split the URL, that information will be saved in there. Now we need to create this function, of course. So we're going to go to functions.php, and that's our first function, that split URL. So this is going to help us split our URL in a sense. So for now, we're just going to assume that, let's see, URL is equal to home. Let's just imagine it's just home page for now. And then let's return a split version using the explode function like that, and we'll explode everything through the slash like so, because we know this is how all websites work. In front of them they've got this slash there, so anything, if for example we have a URL that says home, or let's say products slash new or something like that, and then 1. So we're going to split these items into individual parts from the URL and then return that result. So here we are splitting that URL, and since we haven't given it the right information yet, we're just going to assume we're on the home page for now, like so, just so we have a default value. So we'll create better, we'll edit it a bit later. Okay, so we have our split URL there, that's great. And also let's see, URL, this is going to be an array, right? So I'm going to create another function here, and this function will be called URL, capitalized like that, and then this will return what the contents of the URL are, each individual part. So here we'll expect a key, but this key can be empty, so we'll put a default value. And then here we're going to ask the question if let's say not empty key, right? So if there's a key there, then we'll do one thing, but if there's no key, let's say the key is empty here, we're going to return, let's do else, and then we're going to return the whole app URL from there. So let's do app URL string there, like so. So we wanted to return this item we just created there, right? Yeah, I think that'll work. That will do. Otherwise, let's return an empty string. If none of this works, we return an empty string. But if a key exists, then we return that key instead. So if not empty key, that's great. Again, we'll do another if not empty. So we'll say if not empty app, and then that key. So I'm going to do that, and let's put that key there, like so. If not empty, then return it. So we're going to say return, and then we'll return that particular key. So it's just a way for us to return a specific value from the current URL like that. Okay. So that's great. So of course you can put comments on these things to know what they are for. When we do some testing, you're going to see how these things are used in more detail. All right, so this is great, going well, going great. But now what we need is to put our htaccess files in these locations for security, because right now our website is very, very vulnerable. So let me give an example. So let's try and load this thing into our browser already. So since we deleted all this will not show. If we refresh, we get an empty page, of course, which means there are no errors, and that's great. Also, in our config, we're going to set whether we want to show errors or not. So here what we will do is say we're going to check for the debug the debug constant. So if debug is true, okay, which means we are in debug mode, we're going to put an ini set like that, where we set a value, and this one is display errors. And here we're going to set it to 1 like this, which means we should display errors. So if debug is true, then errors should show. Otherwise, full colon, debug is false, which means we should not show any errors here. So we're going to put a 0 there. So this is simply an if statement. It says if debug is true, run this code. If it's false, run this code here. So we need to make sure that debug exists before we get here, and we should set that in the config.php. That's why it's above here. So in config here, let's define that item. So I'm going to say define, not defined, but define, and we're defining the debug. And here we can either put 1 or 0, true or false. Those things are equivalent. So we're in debug mode right now. So we're going to say true. But when you launch your website, you must make sure to set that to false so you don't see the errors. So your users don't see any errors if they do occur. But you can leave it at true while you are checking for errors and trying to fix things. Okay, so over here we're also going to set the database values right here, and yeah, we will set those later because we don't want this to be dependent on a specific database from the start. A user has to define those things. So let's see what's remaining here. I think we are good to go. So let me refresh and nothing happens. That's great. But we should know that things are working by going to our class app here. Let's just echo something at least. So here we'll say everything is working. If we get that echo, then things are running as intended. So let's refresh, and you see everything is working there. That is awesomeness. Okay, now the problem that we have is security right now. If I go ahead and do /app in our application and do that, I get an index of this page. See, it shows me all my folders, and of course if I click any of these like the core, it's going to show me the files that are in here, and I could essentially just download these files from the application. So this is a huge risk that you get when doing things this way, because we're not doing that format where the application folder is above, is in the, what do you call it? A folder above, right? So we need to put an htaccess file. This is where the Apache, this is where the Apache htaccess file comes in. So I don't know how to do these with different, I'm sure each type of server has a different way of doing it, but Apache uses htaccess files. So what we're gonna do is, I'm just gonna go to app here over and right click and say new file in the app folder. Sorry about that. And I'm gonna hit save, and this I'll save as .htaccess. So no name, just the file extension, which is .htaccess, and save that file. Yeah. And all I'm going to do here is just deny access to all files in this folder and beyond. So I'm just going to say deny from all. And that's all I need to write in there. So once I do this, if I now refresh this page, you see it shows me forbidden. And just like that, we've forbidden anyone from accessing this folder and beyond. So let's try the app folder itself, nothing. The subfolders, nothing. So we don't see anything there. Let me try and access the PHP. There's an app dot it's app.php file in the core, and once I do that, it still says forbidden. Now, if I were to remove this text over here, what will happen is I'm going to refresh, and you see an empty page, which means the app class is actually being accessed in here. It's just that things are inside functions, that's why they are not running, and you have to actually run that function to get it to work. But otherwise, it's loading this file. So if any errors occur, we're supposed to see them over there, which is not good. We're not supposed to be able to access anything. So if I do deny from all, and that actually solves the problem. Now we have forbidden everything in there. That's great, right? Now you may think we should just do this for the entire hierarchy of folders here, but that doesn't work, because if we put that in the htaccess on the main directory, it means even CSS files will not be able to load, so that won't fly. CSS files, JavaScript files, etc., etc. So we can only do that on the application section here. But down here we need different rules that will at least allow CSS files and other files that you want to be accessible, except for PHP files and the like. Okay, so that's step number 1 of our security features. Let me close all of these for now, up to here. So let's add more features in here. We should create an htaccess file as well from here. This should go for the plugins folder. The plugins folder will contain some CSS files as well, so we need different rules for there as well. But let's create an htaccess file for the main directory here. So I'm going to say new folder, new file, sorry, and hit save over here. And I'm going to do .htaccess as well in here, and let's save. Okay, great. Now in order to put comments here, you use the hash symbol like that. So anything you type after the hash symbol in that line is a comment. So here we can say something like only allow certain files to be accessible, etc., etc. So currently, as things exist, let me remove this. Let's just leave the file empty for now. If I go to my browser here and just load the main page like that, everything is working fine, because there's an index.php file that is being loaded immediately there. But the thing is, if there wasn't this index.php file, let me just rename this to index2 or something like that. You will notice that if I refresh the page, it shows me an index of this folder. So it shows me what files are in there, and I can do that, I can read that. So we want to eliminate doing this. So the way we do this, let me go to htaccess. We're going to put options like that, and then do dash indexes like that. So these, we're just telling it that we want to add an option here and minus indexes, so don't show an index of this folder. So if I go ahead and say, what's this? Where is the app folder anyway? Am I getting blind, or that's weird? Okay, so now we have forbidden because we've taught it not to do those things. So let me do app/app. Even that is forbidden as well. Oh, that's why it doesn't show actually. It's because of the htaccess file. Okay, so that by itself forbids you from viewing the files that are in there. So this is what you can put in your folders to make sure that nobody has access to see those files like that. But I think for the first video of this, we can end here and continue in the next video, where we put more advanced options here to improve how the framework actually functions. So I'll see you in the next video.